Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Power Forum. I hope you enjoyed your workshop or workshops. I really enjoyed mine. I am here with our keynote speaker, Marina Hatsopoulos, who's the board chair of Levitronics Technologies. She's an entrepreneur and a writer and a TEDx speaker. So I am really looking forward to hearing what she has to say. You can post your questions to Marina on the chat, and I will pass them on to her after she's finished her talk. So, Marina, hello. It's great to have you here with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Stella. It's a real honor to be here with you, and I'm really excited to talk to you about entrepreneurship as a great path for women. So I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Oops. Okay. So my story, in terms of background, I studied math and music at Brown University. And those were my two passions. I love them, but I always had in my mind that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I went to work at the Chase Manhattan Bank in New York to do corporate finance for the oil and gas industry. And I learned some important skills there. I learned basic accounting, finance, how to negotiate, and how to sell within a corporate relationship. So those were useful skills that I've carried with me, and I think they're useful for anyone. And then I went to work at Thermoelectron in mergers and acquisitions, and I discovered there, that's a technology conglomerate, that I was lacking a technology background. So I went to MIT and got my Master's of Science in Mechanical Engineering, and then set out to find a technology to commercialize. I found one at MIT in 3D printing. This was a technology that was invented at MIT in the early 90s. And four of us out of MIT founded the business in 1994 and set up shop in Kendall Square, Cambridge, which is considered the most innovative mile in the world. We delivered our product within 2 years, and we became the fastest growing business in New England in 2001. There was no venture capital available at that time for hardware businesses because everything was all about the internet at that time. Nevertheless, we grew over 10 years to $30 million in revenues with 125 employees. And we became one of the market leaders with #2 in market share in 3D printing at that time. Since the sale of the business, we ended up selling the business in 2005. I was really burnt out. I have 4 children. So we were growing a family at the same time as growing the business. And so we sold the business. I'm now a corporate director. I've been a director of large public companies, small private companies, startups. I do some angel investing. I advise startups. And increasingly, I've gotten involved in the Greek startup ecosystem, which I think is really exciting. To me, Greece is in itself kind of like a startup itself. Despite the destruction that was caused by the economic collapse in 2008, this actually allowed for a change and new growth, which I think is really exciting for the future of Greece. I have also become a writer of published articles, essays, and short stories, and you can find them on windystreet.com. So talking about technology entrepreneurship, what's happened over the last decades is that low barriers to entry are fueling technology entrepreneurs. So there has never been a better time or a greater opportunity. What's so great about technology entrepreneurship is that it provides for socioeconomic mobility. It doesn't care who you know. It's a question of finding a need in the marketplace and exploiting that need. Startups create jobs. So in the United States, all the net new jobs in the US economy come from startups less than 5 years old. And that's really a remarkable impact that startups have on the economy. And that's why I think startups are so important for Greece going forward. Looking at the United States startup hubs, startups tend to cluster, and there are a bunch of elements that you will see consistently within any startup hub. So it starts with a network of suppliers, customers, startups, and large enterprise. And all of these provide value to encourage startups to be successful. There's also plenty of funding available for startups. This can be in the form of venture capital, as well as angel investments. Also, large enterprise, which invests in startups. There are also exited entrepreneurs within this community, which create and invest in new ventures. So it becomes a self-fulfilling kind of a community. The culture within these startup hubs is that it's okay to break the norm. It's okay to fail. This is really important in generating an entrepreneurial climate. All of these hubs have a very strong center of universities and research centers. So this provides research and innovation, which allows technology to drive forward. It also provides student talent for future employees. And there are entrepreneurial programs which educate the students on how to become entrepreneurs. All of these startup hubs have many incubators, accelerators, and co-working spaces, which also enable startups to grow. And this is really important. You may not appreciate that, but when we were building Z Corp in the early 90s, there was no co-working space. So we had to sign on to a 5-year lease, knowing that in 5 years, either we were going to be out of business and wouldn't want any space, or we were going to be successful and would need much more space. And so this concept of flexibility in terms of space is extremely important for startups. And I don't know if people appreciate that. These US startup hubs have created a record level of exit of $290 billion last year within COVID. Record US VC investments of $156 billion. And interestingly, it's very concentrated. So nearly 80% of these investments have been in the top 3 states or 10 cities in the US. So number 1 is California with over half. Then second is New York. And number 3 is Massachusetts, which with about 10%. There are other startup hubs as well in the United States. There's Austin, Texas, which has agriculture, Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, San Diego, and Washington, D.C. And there are big differences by region. So within each region, there are industry specialties. There are differences in politics, differences in culture, and also major differences in cost of living. The difference in cost of living between Austin and San Francisco is enormous. And so that's something to really take into account when you're thinking about where to set up. The Greek startup ecosystem, excuse me one second. The Greek startup ecosystem is really developing well. So these are startups with a Greek founder. And so these can be located within Greece or outside of Greece, but generally about half are based in Greece. There are 608 Greek startups since 2010, which have raised $6 billion. And they've made record investments in 2020 of $1.2 billion. $900 million was invested in startups with Greek operations. And there have been plenty of exits, 84 acquisitions and 8 IPOs. The European Investment Fund has spurred Greek venture capital industry by providing 300 million euros a couple of years ago. And this has allowed the venture capital industry to really grow and develop. There are incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces, and competitions all over Greece. So it's really exciting to see this ecosystem start to thrive. And Greece has many models like Israel and like the United States to follow. When thinking about startup formation, it starts with an idea, and often this idea comes from the university or research center. Researchers need entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs need researchers. So it's really important to recognize and appreciate how important both these components are. Startups are offering solutions to problems. Opportunity comes from disruptions in the market, where startups have an edge over established businesses. When you're thinking about what kind of a startup to form, you're looking for something that has recently changed. It could be regulations, it could be an enabling technology that has just come about, but there's some reason why in the past this startup didn't exist, and today it's the right time to do it. What you don't want to be doing to answer the question, why doesn't this already exist? The answer should not be, we're smarter than the rest of the world. Because generally, if nothing has changed, there's probably a good reason why this does not exist. Looking at intellectual property, you want to look at patents. So these are things that are difficult to invent and easy to copy. Trade secrets, so these are things that are not patentable, but might be difficult to copy. And then there's know-how that covers processes, ingredients, et cetera. And you really want to focus on developing intellectual property. The reason intellectual property is important is it allows you to differentiate your product over the competition. So going from idea to startup, you want to be speaking with your customers every day. You want to stay focused and ignore distractions. Disregard awards, press coverage, and other accolades. Your value is in your startup's revenue, growth, and profitability. And one thing to recognize, as things are getting difficult, which they always will, and you'll always hit a bump in the road, is the less you know about a business, the easier it appears from the outside. So before you drop everything and go into a new business, recognize that it will always look easier from the outside. And as you dig deeper, you will recognize all the challenges. And that's not a time to run away, that's a time to dig in deeper. The team is the most important factor for your success. So you want to work with people before hiring whenever possible and really leverage the network that you've already built. But make sure not to hire someone that you can't fire. Some employees might be okay, but they might not be great. So we all make mistakes. That's natural. You need to deal with them and move on. Empower people and capitalize on the stars. Even if they have holes, if they are truly amazing, then you can't afford to let them go, and make sure you just find a way to fill in the holes of whatever it is that they're missing. It's really important to have a salesperson on the founding team. This gives you a 3 times chance of success, and find whatever missing areas of expertise there are on your team and fill in those roles. The market should be big enough. You want to try to sell the product before the product even exists, maybe with a demonstration. Early prospects will help guide the development. Customers may fund research and development. That's ideal because that also validates your product. And don't worry about people stealing your ideas. You have much more to gain than to lose by talking with customers. And this is something I see in Greece a lot. But it's really important. You want to be talking with as many people as possible because that's how you're going to get important feedback that will help drive your business. In terms of competition, competition can be okay. They actually educate the market, and the more innovative your product, you'll see the more education is needed to get your customers to buy your product. Competition, though, from very large incumbents like Google or Amazon is really, really tough. They have capital, they have talent, and they have experience. They're not stupid. So you really want to veer away from a business that is going to go head to head with that kind of an incumbent. You want to look at who is perfectly positioned in terms of customers or technology. Why haven't they done it already? What will keep them from entering the market? Will they have an unfair advantage, or will you? You really want to focus on what is your product differentiation. What makes your product better than anything else? And what makes you, your team, uniquely positioned to do this? Corporate culture is very important. And when you're starting up a business, you really want to be very intentional about this. You need to focus. You can't do everything. All that matters is results, not face time or experience. Time to market is critical and it's urgent. Be strong. Don't avoid conflict. Be straightforward. Don't hide things from your employees. Also employ the 80-20 rule. Perfection is your enemy. You need to move along fast, and that means not being perfect, but striving for excellence. I highly recommend, if you're starting in Greece, to create a US-based board of directors, and always be setting your milestones and deliver on those milestones. Startup formation requires a culture of breaking the norms. So this is a disregard for norms that are not relevant. To innovate, you need to do something different. learn what's out there, and do better. The state of the art is only a starting point. It's not the end point. You need to know what's out there, but you need to go beyond what's out there. And you cannot follow the playbook. When you're doing innovative technology development, there is no playbook. So you need to make your own decisions, and you need to be very thoughtful about those. When you're entering the US market, be aware of US startup culture. So the culture is to just do it, break the norms, take risk. Failure is okay. Think out of the box. What has never been done before? You also want to be collaborative. Teamwork is extremely important. Be open, get feedback, learn what others are doing, and be aware of cultural differences on a regional basis, because the US is a huge country and things are very different, East Coast to the Midwest to the West Coast. Doing business with Americans requires you to communicate clearly and directly, to make decisions quickly. There's an urgency, so respond immediately. Plan ahead, arrange meetings before your arrival, follow through on anything you say you're going to do, and network using LinkedIn, not Facebook. One thing to be aware of is that immigrant-founded startups actually fuel the US economy. Half of America's billion-dollar startups have an immigrant founder. So these are companies like Yahoo, Google, and Intel. A quarter came to the US as a student, and these startups create a huge number of jobs. Of all the new startups in the US, 1/3 were founded by an immigrant. And there's lots of venture capital available for immigrant founders. You might enter the US as a student, and the US universities are filled with international students. They have programming for startups, and typical university startup will have an entrepreneur who was a student with a professor who's an advisor, and this can often provide a lower risk transition from working in a university lab to setting up a startup. Setting up operations in the US, you have to be aware that talent is expensive and it's very mobile. Space is also very expensive. Understand the local customs. There's an urgency. Decisions are made by individuals who have autonomy. They're not made by committee. But one thing that's a huge advantage to setting up in the US is that there is so much capital available. But you have to do your homework on the venture capitalists ahead of time, get lots of feedback on your pitch, and ideally try to meet VCs in an informal setting before you formally pitch to them. There are many early stage incubators, accelerators, and startup competitions all over the country. Fundraising, you need a US parent if you're going to set up in the US and get venture capital. You need a US presence. You need lots of funding. There's lots of funding available if you have all this. But you want to find investors who know the industry and who have deep pockets, being aware that you'll have to make 500 pitches before getting an investment. So when you're pitching, ideally you want to really be clear. We make blank for blank to blank. So what is your product? Who is your customer? And what is the problem that you're solving? And you want to have a large market that looks interesting to them. You need to describe the competition. Talk about your team. Why is your team uniquely qualified to do this? And then talk about your intellectual property. What patents do you have? What know-how? What trade secrets? What investors want to see is a strong team with strong product differentiation. They want to see what has changed, what's new today, how big is your market, and why do you have an advantage over any large company? Do you have intellectual property? Do you have recurring revenues? For sources of capital, there's angel funding, venture capital, strategic investors, and government grants. So angels are smaller investors. They provide $25,000 to $500,000. Venture capitalists, we all know, they provide larger investments, but typically they're looking for a very huge upside, and they will exercise more control over your business. Strategic investors are ideal. So these could be customers, distributors, or suppliers, and they will generally give you better terms, and they'll provide validation as well as credibility. And don't forget US government grants. There are amazing grants available, and I have seen companies raise millions and millions of dollars. This is non-dilutive funding, and so I highly recommend taking a look at it. In conclusion, when you're doing a startup, you want to think about what are your goals? Is it to be independent, to make money, to employ people, teamwork, community, to make the world a little better. What are your short-term and long-term goals? It's really important to have this set out because this is a long road ahead. This isn't something you're going to flip in a year. It's going to take time. And so you want to make sure that you're really committed to it. And in parting, I just want to say that controlling your destiny and creating a product that solves a problem in the world is extremely enriching. So persevere. It's hard, it's risky, and it takes a lot of time. But for a woman in particular, it provides tremendous flexibility in the early days. You have a lot of flexibility over your schedule. And so I had young children as I was growing the business, and that can be done. So celebrate your milestones and make sure to have fun all along the way. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marina. That was so great. And I already have two nice questions for you on the chat. Keep putting your questions on the chat and I will pass them on. So our first question is, how do you advise people who are starting up to hire? Either to select a co-founder or to hire for one of the key roles, the first key roles that a small startup team should have. So do you hire for skills? Do you hire for character? Do you hire for purpose? How do you hire?
So I think everyone has their own philosophies about hiring. What we did at Z Corporation, we had a very strong philosophy. We were doing something very innovative. So we did not want to hire people who had a lot of specifically relevant experience because we wanted to do something different. However, we wanted people who had success in whatever they had done before. And we generally hired people who were very young because honestly, we couldn't afford older people. And that worked out really well. These were people who wanted to prove themselves. They were young, they were hungry, they were extremely driven. And they had been successful, not in 3D printing, but they had been successful in whatever endeavor they had done before. So we had some sense of their level of competence.
Okay, that's great. That's helpful, I think. And I have one other question, which is about your role as an investor, an angel investor, and an advisor. How do you choose what startups are you going to invest in or advise? I mean, how do you select the ones you think are going to be more successful?
So again, I think everyone has their own philosophy. For me, I don't have a team working for me doing research. So for me, there are a couple of criteria. One is that I know something about the market. So it's very hard to educate yourself on a new market without a team of people to do that research for you. So and then you also, just like with the startup, you're looking for an opportunity. Where is there a hole? Where do you have an advantage? So for me, I saw a hole in hardware because I knew as a hardware entrepreneur how difficult it was to raise funding because everyone was really looking at software. Those economic models are more attractive to professional investors. And so I saw an opportunity in hardware. That's shifted a little over the last few years. Others have gotten into hardware investing more recently. But that's where I saw the opportunity initially after leaving Z Corp.
And how would you advise startups to deal with rejection when they are trying to, access finance or approach an investor and they get the rejection? How do they deal with that?
Yeah, rejection is really tough. I mean, but it is part of the game. You need to deal with rejection every single day, literally every single day. It could be customers who are not interested, investors who don't want to invest. Like everywhere you turn, people are rejecting you. The bank doesn't want to loan you money. What you need to do is forget your ego, shed your ego. That's not the issue. But you don't want to waste it. Every failure, you really want to make sure you're taking something away and learning from it and advancing yourself. So when an investor says they don't want to invest, that is an opportunity to learn. And they may be uncomfortable telling you why, but push them, press them, ask them, how can I make my pitch better? Why aren't you interested in this business? What would make this business interesting to you? What did you see were the biggest failures in terms of my communication, in terms of how this business could grow, in terms of market size? Really try to get to the bottom of what is behind the failure. Anytime you fail as a business, let's say your product doesn't work, you've released it to the market and it just doesn't work. Make sure you have a post-mortem with your team, with the technical people. What went wrong, not just in terms of specifically technically what went wrong, but what went wrong in terms of your processes as an organization. Why didn't you catch that? What do you need to change? One thing we learned at Z Corp was in the development schedule, we had to build in an extra 6 months over what we had originally envisioned just to do the final testing, quality assurance, and really getting the product really ready for any customer in the market.
That's really helpful. Thank you. I have one last double question, and it's about the gender financing gap. If you can see a gender financing gap in your work, in your field, and if you think that this gap is impacted by how many women are active as investors, as angel investors, VC investors, what do you think about that?
I don't know. I just don't know. I'm not an expert on that area, so I'm not sure. I've heard the data, and it's really striking, the data, but I can't say that I've had any direct experience. Certainly, I would imagine if there are more women investors out there, that especially in terms of products which a woman could understand and appreciate better than a man, I would think that would be more receptive to that kind of a product opportunity.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thank you so much for this speech and the answers you gave us. Um, I think we are ready to go on to our mentoring sessions. If you have booked a mentoring session, feel free to click on the link and go meet your mentor and pose any questions you may have. We would love to have you join us tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a very different day. We are going to have a keynote speech and presentations on best practices from around the world on how to promote female entrepreneurship, tech entrepreneurship. But then we are going to split into working groups and create our own prototypes for initiatives boosting female entrepreneurship in Greece. So you have a chance to make a difference and create an initiative that will actually be implemented in Greece, maybe. Over the following months. And this will happen tomorrow. If you haven't yet registered, you have a chance to do so today. We would love to see you again. And good luck with your mentoring sessions.